The sky was calm, almost indifferent, as a dive bomber drifted above a vast, empty ocean. Far below, nothing suggested that history was about to pivot in the span of a few heartbeats. The fuel gauge trembled near empty. The engine vibrated with the weary rhythm of a pilot who had been searching for an enemy that refused to appear. For hours, only silence answered the men who flew into that morning, believing they might not return. Their comrades had been torn from the sky one by one. The air still carried the echoes of burning torpedo planes and the black scars of failed attacks. Yet somewhere beneath that quiet surface, the fate of a war hung unresolved. Then a thin white wake appeared, just a line on the water cutting northeast with purpose. It came from a lone destroyer racing to rejoin a fleet no one could find. And in that moment, a single choice rose before the pilot: turn back towards safety or follow that fading trail into the unknown. He chose to follow. Within minutes, he would descend through the sunlight and into a moment that would break an empire's momentum and reshape the Pacific War forever. The months leading to that morning were shaped by a belief that seemed unbreakable. Across the Pacific, the rising empire of Japan had moved with the certainty of a force destined to win. From the smoking ruins of Pearl Harbor to the fall of Hong Kong, Singapore, and the Philippines, each victory told the same story: Japan's advance appeared unstoppable. Across half an ocean, their enemies retreated, regrouped, or simply collapsed under the weight of relentless momentum. At the center of this surge were the Japanese aircraft carriers, sleek, disciplined instruments of naval air power. Their pilots had trained for years, hardened in combat from the skies over China to the waters around Southeast Asia. They believed fiercely in Yamato Damashi. The spirit that taught them victory came from willpower as much as steel. To the leaders steering the Pacific War, this faith became a shield against doubt. Japan's admirals assumed their fleet could not be surprised, and more importantly, could not be defeated. But belief is not intelligence. And in Pearl Harbor's dimly lit code-breaking rooms, American cryptographers had quietly stolen the initiative. Working through fragments of intercepted transmissions, they discovered that Japan's next target, known only as AF, was Midway. They uncovered the date. They traced the route. From this revelation, something rare in war emerged: clarity. Admiral Chester Nimitz, calm and methodical, saw what few commanders ever receive in the Pacific War: a chance to meet an enemy exactly where he intended to strike. He moved 3 American carriers, including the hastily repaired Yorktown, northeast of the atoll. He placed them in the one patch of ocean where they could lie silent, unseen, and ready. Meanwhile, the Japanese fleet sailed confidently toward what it believed would be a decisive blow. Their battle plan was intricate, divided across multiple task forces stretching hundreds of miles. A diversionary attack in the Aleutians would lure American attention north. The main force would crush Midway itself, drawing the American carriers into a trap. On paper, it was a masterpiece. In practice, its complexity created seams, and through those seams, the Americans watched everything unfold. By dawn on June 4th, the battle had begun in earnest. Waves of Marine Corps fighters and bombers rose from Midway Island, their engines echoing across the reef as they fought to defend the outpost. They were brave, determined, and heartbreakingly outmatched. Japanese Zero fighters carved through their formations. Bombers fell blazing into the sea. Still, they pressed on, attempting to disrupt what they could. But each failed attack only reinforced what everyone already knew. The Battle of Midway was becoming a test between experience and endurance, between a confident empire and a fleet fighting for time. High above this chaos, pilots like Wade McClusky were still searching the empty sea. Their orders were simple yet unforgiving: find the Japanese aircraft carriers and stop them before they struck a final decisive blow in the Pacific War. But the ocean remained silent, the sky vast and the clock merciless. Their moment had not yet come, but it was moving toward them. By mid-morning, the battle had become a brutal test of endurance. The first American strikes launched from Midway had failed to slow the approaching fleet. And now the carriers of Task Force 16 and Task Force 17 committed their own aircraft to the fight. They went in waves, small, scattered, and heartbreakingly uncoordinated. Each pilot knew the odds, yet each flew on, threading across an ocean of blue toward a fleet that had never lost a major engagement in the Pacific War. The torpedo squadrons attacked first. They flew low and slow, their obsolete devastators bucking against the waves as they approached the armored hulls of the Japanese aircraft carriers. Without fighter escort, and without the advantage of altitude, they faced Zero fighters descending like falling knives. Plane after plane burst into flames. Torpedoes hit the sea without purpose. 15 aircraft from Torpedo Squadron 8 went in. Only one man, Ensign George Gay, lived to see the end of the attack, floating alone amid wreckage and oil. From the decks of Akagi, and Kaga Japanese officers watched the spectacle with a mix of admiration and cold certainty. Their combat air patrol had swept the sky clean. The Americans seemed desperate, throwing men and machines into hopeless attacks, far beneath the cruising altitude of the dive bombers still searching. At this point in the Battle of Midway, it appeared the momentum belonged once again to Japan. But unseen from the bridge of any carrier, something else was happening. The Japanese fighters, so effective at low altitude, had been pulled downward by the torpedo attacks. They remained near the waves, hunting the last American stragglers. Above them, the sky was empty, an opening so rare that no Japanese commander imagined it could exist. It was in this quiet upper airspace that the fate of the Pacific War would soon be rewritten. At 10:20 a.m., Admiral Chuichi Nagumo made a decision shaped by confidence and urgency. American ships had been sighted, the chance to destroy them decisively, and finally seemed moments away. He ordered his strike force prepared, 87 aircraft loaded with bombs and torpedoes, armed and fueled engines warming on decks crowded almost to the edge. The Japanese aircraft carriers turned into the wind, ready to launch a blow that would erase American resistance for months, perhaps years. Yet even as these preparations neared completion, the American dive bombers were still lost. In the vastness of the ocean, their fuel was dwindling, their search patterns unraveling. And at the center of this uncertainty flew Wade McClusky, still tracing the horizon, still refusing to concede that the enemy had slipped away. All the failures of the morning, every lost bomber, every burning torpedo plane had bought a few unnoticed minutes. And all those minutes were converging toward a single point in the sky. The moment of impact was coming. It only needed someone to find the target. McClusky's moment arrived not with a grand revelation, but with a thin white wake slicing across the sea. A lone destroyer racing northeast Arashi, moving at full speed to rejoin the fleet it had left behind. For Wade McClusky, low on fuel and nearly out of time, that wake was more than a clue. It was a lifeline. He banked his dauntless toward it, trusting intuition over procedure, and led 32 bombers across the widening emptiness. Minutes later, the ocean below changed. Shapes appeared, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, arranged in a perfect diamond, their decks packed with aircraft, armed, fueled, and moments away from launching. It was the very configuration that Japanese doctrine assured would never be caught unprepared. Yet in that instant, they were as vulnerable as ships could be. No fighter circled above. No radar scanned the sky. No officer on any bridge suspected that danger was already beginning its descent. At 10:24 a.m., McClusky called a single word: attack. The dauntless dive bombers rolled into 70-degree dives, sunlight flashing off their wings as they fell from 14,000 feet. The Americans plunged toward a fleet that had dominated the Pacific War, and for the first time, the fleet could not defend itself. Kaga was hit first. Bombs struck near her island structure, tearing open the packed flight deck. Aviation fuel sprayed into open air. Otsir. Flames raced across wooden planking as armed torpedoes detonated in sympathetic bursts. In less than a minute, the veteran carrier, one of the spearheads of Pearl Harbor, began to die. Akagi was next. Almost all the bombers had mistakenly targeted Kaga, but 3 planes broke away, led by Lieutenant Richard Best. Their single perfectly timed attack delivered a bomb that pierced the flight deck and exploded, deep within the hangar, igniting rows of torpedoes and fuel lines. The heart of the flagship erupted in fire. On the bridge, officers were thrown to the floor as shockwaves roared through steel. Soryu followed, within moments struck by precision dives from the Yorktown group. 3 bombs carved through her deck, turning compartments into roaring furnaces. Her crew abandoned ship as explosions ripped through her hull. In 5 minutes, barely enough time to breathe, 3 of the 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were fatally damaged. It was a transformation so sudden, so absolute, that even the men witnessing it struggled to grasp what had happened. Carriers that had once terrorized the Pacific now burned helplessly beneath a sky they no longer controlled. But the battle was not over. Hiryu, the last surviving carrier, fought back with desperate resolve. She launched 2 counterstrikes that found and crippled the Yorktown, leaving the American ship listing wounded and eventually abandoned. For a brief moment, it seemed Hiryu might seize a fragment of the initiative that had once defined the Empire's advance. But American scout planes located her late in the afternoon. Dive bombers from Enterprise descended just as they had earlier that day, striking Hiryu with 4 bombs and setting her ablaze. By nightfall, she too was beyond rescue. 4 carriers gone. An elite corps of aviators lost forever, and with them the Empire's last real chance to dictate the course of the Battle of Midway and of the Pacific War itself. The flames that consumed the 4 Japanese aircraft carriers did more than end a single engagement. They fractured the foundation of an Empire's war plan. In Tokyo, the shock rippled upward through the Naval Command. Officers who had believed fiercely in their training and doctrine now faced a truth they had never prepared for. The Battle of Midway had reversed the momentum of the entire Pacific War in a single morning. For Japan, the loss of the carriers was catastrophic. The ships themselves could not be replaced quickly. Each required years of specialized labor and scarce resources. But the deeper wound lay in the loss of their aviators. These were veterans honed since 1937 pilots, capable of threading torpedoes within feet of a moving ship or striking targets from 12,000 feet with remarkable precision. Japan's training pipeline, long and unforgiving, could not regenerate this experience. From this point onward, every sortie weakened the fleet. Every replacement pilot arrived with less training than the one before. For the United States, the picture looked different. Though Yorktown was lost, American industry was awakening in full. Shipyards could produce new carriers faster than Japan could sink them. Pilot training, expanded aircraft design, advanced and logistic systems matured into a network capable of sustaining operations across thousands of miles. The result was a widening gap not only in numbers but in resilience. The Pacific War would now move according to American pace. Within 2 months, U.S. Marines landed at Guadalcanal. Japanese attempts to contest the island bled away their remaining air power. By the time of the Philippines Sea in 1944, the once feared carrier arm was reduced to inexperienced pilots flying into radar-directed defenses. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as American aviators grimly called it, symbolized the irreversible decline that began at Midway. Strategically, the world watched a shift that extended beyond military charts. Midway demonstrated that naval warfare had entered a new age, one defined not by battleships, but by carriers, not by individual valor alone, but by intelligence coordination and industrial depth. Nations studying the conflict recognized the future control of the sea would belong to the fleet that mastered the air above it. And in the midst of this transformation stood the quiet decision of Wade McClusky, whose choice to follow a lonely wake altered the global balance of power. The ramifications of that moment extended far beyond June 1942. They shaped the alliances, doctrines, and strategies that would define the post-war world. When the smoke finally thinned and the ocean settled into an uneasy silence, the pilots who returned to their ships carried more than exhaustion. They carried the knowledge that something irreversible had happened. The victory at the Battle of Midway did not feel triumphant in the way Hollywood might imagine. It felt heavy, earned through loss of sacrifice, and a chain of choices that could easily have turned another way. Among those who limped home was Wade McClusky, his aircraft riddled with holes, his fuel nearly exhausted, his shoulder torn by shrapnel. He said little of heroism. He said he simply followed the evidence before him, a lone destroyer cutting through the sea. Yet the consequences of that instinct stretched across the entire Pacific War, shaping the world far beyond the cockpit of a single dive bomber. For Japan, the burning hulks of its 4 Japanese aircraft carriers marked the end of its offensive reach. For the United States, Midway became the moment when industry intelligence and determination converged into an advantage no opponent could blunt. The lessons resonate. Even now, wars are decided by the systems behind the soldiers, the supply lines, the training programs, the ability to learn faster than the enemy. But the human cost remains the truest measure. Hundreds of pilots from both nations vanished into fire or water that day. Some trapped below decks, others drifting alone on the waves. Their stories, unfinished and unknown, give weight to the history we study. They remind us that the Battle of Midway was not just a hinge of the Pacific War, but a testament to courage under impossible odds. And so the legacy endures. 5 minutes, 300 seconds reshaped the trajectory of nations. The aircraft that fell through the sky that morning carried with them the burden of a world in conflict, and their actions carved the path toward its end. Long after the carriers were gone and the war concluded, the echoes remained in strategy rooms, in textbooks, and the quiet reflections of those who survived. For those who value the lessons of history, the question lingers. What do you believe is the most enduring lesson of the Battle of Midway? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective keeps these stories alive. And if you wish to continue exploring the decisions, sacrifices, and turning points that shape the modern world, consider joining us for the next chapter. More stories of the Pacific wait beyond the horizon.